Now I'm happy to introduce for the first time to the show a man that I followed and listened to in the Chicagoland area for many, many years, Mr. Mike North. You can find his great sports betting show at the Odds Couple on ESPN 1000. Follow him on Twitter at North2North. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's draft week in the NFL. How you feeling about it?
First of all, Kiev. Kiev O'Neill. It's an Irish name from back in the day. I love the name, number one, my friend. Number two, yeah, listen, the draft isn't what it used to be. I used to know the draft. People used to know the draft before there were 500 stations, when there was only 5 stations, and college, there was no portal, transfer portal. There was none of that nonsense. Everybody stayed in school for 4 years. You had just magazines. Yet, with all these computers and everything, nobody knows anything about most of these kids. And it's amazing because the draft used to be a spectacle. It used to be on Saturday when it was 80 degrees and you would take off, not play baseball that day, and watch the draft. It's grown, but it's not the same. It's over a 3-day span. I think people come in and come out now. I do think this is the weakest draft in my lifetime. In my lifetime, where there's no solid number one. No. There's no solid number two. The 10th pick could be the first pick. The first pick could be the 10th pick. So 90% of the guys that you'll see, Kiev, is it Kiev or Kiev?
Kiev.
90% of the guys, Kiev, will not know anything about the draft up to about 2 weeks ago. Then they'll look at the computers and they'll tell you all you need to know. Because 10% of these guys actually devote their lives to it. Right. The other 90, I mean, Danny Lee, when I started at the Score, told me, you don't have an off season. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you're good at basketball, football, baseball, and hockey. You're a quadruple threat. I said, wow, thanks, boss. He says, but we all had some part of those games that we weren't really good at. And if I was a host today, the draft would be one of them. I'd have to read up, do my homework, like I think 90% of the guys are.
Yeah, definitely. And now everybody has a mock draft, being that there's just so many media outlets there. You know what's funny about what you said too, Mike? You'd think that this would be a great year, being that a lot of kids stayed an extra year in college, but it's not, you know? I mean, the quarterback class, they're terrible.
They're trying to tell me, anybody is trying to tell me that 5 quarterbacks could be taken, that Pickett all of a sudden is the second coming of Dan Marino. You got Willis, you got all these guys that won't be worth the crap. Last year's class isn't worth a damn right now. With Trevor Lawrence and Justin Field, all those quarterbacks fell on their face. Sam Darnold from previous drafts, all these quarterbacks are supposed. You got to get with the right team, the right system. You got to get with the right coach. I mean, a lot of dynamics go into play for one guy. I mean, Tim Couch, who was as heralded as any quarterback I've ever seen, coming out of Kentucky. He made Kentucky good. And that's what I like to see. Who was the quarterback that made average programs look good? Like Tim Couch. Or Eli Manning at Ole Miss. Eli Manning, I go, this kid's good. They go, what? How do you know he's good? I go, Mississippi is kicking people's ass. Anybody like Justin Fields or the late, God bless him, Dwayne. Anybody, it seems, can go to Ohio State and throw a lot of touchdowns because you got the ultimate talent. Make Mississippi a winner. Make Kentucky a winner. You know, go to Clemson, Deshaun Watson. Make Clemson a winner. Mm-hmm, you know what I mean? Those are the quarterbacks that I would look at. I just don't see any big-time talent out there. So, I think the way to bet the draft this year is how many wide receivers are going to be picked. Is it the over and unders 5.5? Is there going to be 2.5 quarterbacks picked in the first round, over and under? I think that's the way you got to go. If you try to nail certain guys because of the odds, I think you're going to come up empty a lot, Kev.
Well, we're going to get into that, and I can't wait to talk about that. But I'll tell you
Right.
it's funny. It's a massive guessing game. I think people were too high on last year's class, and they went to the wrong
Absolutely.
systems, friggin' Urban Meyer. And then they might even be too low on this because, to be honest with you, you don't know that much. We do not know who's going to
No,
come out. We don't, and
no.
it's just all speculation right now. And hell, one of these guys could turn out. And that's what's kind of fun about it, to find some of those diamonds. I love the Tom Brady story. One of the last guys drafted becomes the best guy of all time. I mean, there's nothing better than that, Mike.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that guy there has made people take a harder look at the
Mhm.
mid and later rounds. I mean,
Mhm.
when you stop and think that he's the greatest quarterback who ever lived, and I saw them all from Wyatt Tittle to Joe Montana to Norm Snead to Milt Plum. I've seen every quarterback from the 60s on. And I thought, boy, this Montana's special. It's
Yeah,
going to be
he was.
tough to beat him. And then this guy comes along and and he's a good guy, married to a hot chick, gets drunk once in a while like everybody else, like he did at the celebration. He's a guy that has it all that I don't think people are envious of. He's still got the Midwestern mentality. He doesn't walk around with the cigarette holder like John Barrymore, you know what I mean? And walk around like a hotshot. So I think character big comes into play with Tom Brady. I think when you're a mid-round quarterback, fourth, fifth, sixth, you better have character because you should have character because you didn't make it to number one status, so you've been crapped on a little bit. And I think that helped the guy because he had a giant chip on his shoulder.
And that might help this class, just like how I said it's a terrible class. I could be completely wrong. I'm just picking on Pickett's hand size. Malik Willis against the zone's been terrible. I mean, we can keep going on and on. Matt Corral didn't test good in the interviews. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff we can say, but this might even give them the edge to try harder. And that's what happened with Brady.
Yeah, I think that Brady's one of a kind, two of a kind. Maybe there'll be another couple guys come along, but most of the guys that have been great are your Peyton Mannings of the world that go to the university. And by the way, winning at Tennessee, I think Peyton Manning always had the stigma of not being a big time winner, not because of not only did he have a lack of success in the pros, and when I say that he won two Super Bowls, I give him one for himself, big time at
Mhm.
Indianapolis. But T. Martin won the very next year at Tennessee. And Peyton Manning never won at Tennessee. You know, T. Martin won a national championship, and he ended up in Canada. So you need some luck too. You need, I think, to be number one in anything, and you need you need work ethic, you need character, and that's what I would look at. You know, the Chicago Bears just had a wide receiver, Pringle, who was doing donuts with a little kid in the back of the car, and they just picked him up. You know,
I
at
saw
some
that. The
point, I
Bears.
know he's a Pro Bowler. You got to look at character in football players, and I think now that's been stressed as much as anything because of that kid Ruggle, the kid in what was his name, Ruggs in
Ruggs,
Oakland,
Henry Ruggs, first pick
in
of the
Vegas.
first wide receiver pick to that draft, made one of the biggest mistakes of his life.
Of his
And
life
you just going that fast, bad things are bound to
and
happen.
killing
And
somebody.
it's hard to know that. And then
Yep.
obviously, speaking of luck, let's look at our GM Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. Obviously, the Pringle thing, not a good look, but it's not like we broke the bank for the guy. But man, I guess what is your early feelings on our new GM and head coach here for the Bears?
Inexperienced. Second, I didn't know that we were Indianapolis's farm system where we take not, you know, they're junior executives. You know, Eberflus, I mean, the last game I saw him in, coach, he lost to Jacksonville.
Mhm.
With that defense got riddled. I mean, and he took his share of criticism in Indianapolis, but you won't see the Chicago media bring that out. I have not heard anybody in Indianapolis, I don't know if you have, distraught over the loss of Poles and Eberflus. How could we lose them? I remember losing Buddy Ryan with the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I do too.
And
That was tough.
okay, I don't hear nobody worried about Eberflus leaving any organization to become a head coach for the Chicago Bears. They got a big job ahead of them. They had a better quarterback. I've always been a Mitch Trubisky fan. They seem to think that he was supposed to be like Mahomes. Nobody is, or nobody was. Mahomes may only win one Super Bowl for the rest of his career. I think Mitch Trubisky for $7 million for a year for 2 years. Pittsburgh Steelers do it again. They know how to judge, and I think Justin Fields is serviceable at best. He can't read a defense. And you talked about small hands. That don't matter. Can you hold on to the football? He fumbled 11 times in his rookie year. He's got to get better than that. But you know who your guy with the small hands reminds me of? Remember Dave Craig?
Oh, yes, Dave Craig. Was
He
that
had
late
small
90s,
hands.
early 2000s, something like that?
You know what, Kia? He had small hands, and he fumbled tons. So
Yeah.
that's how I think. But you know what? I never buy into that crap. I think if you made it this far, the size of your hands, to me, is insignificant.
Well, let's hope so, because his are extraordinarily small. Kyle Allen didn't make him look so good here, being in Carolina with all his fumbles, because that was a knock on him. And then he fumbled a little bit, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, what Matt Eberflus, I never thought that he'd be the guy coming in. And why isn't the Chicago media destroying this guy? Because I didn't think they were that great. And yes, they were injured a little bit, but Darius Leonard made Indianapolis's defense, man. And maybe Eberflus did something, but I don't see nothing spectacular here. I'd be very, very concerned here for a guy coming in that's just touted by the media. I sometimes think that, McCaskey's down are just like they do what people tell them to do in a way, and sometimes it's just all pure hype and terrible decisions.
Mainstream media does what they're told if they cover the Bears. They take the Bears party line. Nagy refused to meet with Mitch Trubisky said he was going to meet him in 2019 to expand the playbook. Mitch waited for him. He never showed up. You never heard about it for 2 years. You heard about it 3 years later about this after Nagy's fired. So all the media sat on that story in Chicago for 3 years. They pillaged Mitch Trubisky, who had 64 touchdowns and 37 interceptions, is the highest rated Bear quarterback of all time, the highest rated percentage quarterback of the Bears all time, went to 2 playoff games in 3 years, only played 3.5 years, was sacked after going 2-0 to bring in Nick Foles, who everybody wanted except me. And you could put the people that wanted that move, that didn't want that move, me and about a couple other people. The media, the Bears, and 75% of the fans kicked out a good quarterback. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are going, are you kidding? And then Mitch sees last year's draft. And this is what's important. You had to, I was in business before I was in radio for 30 years. And I'm going to tell you right now, he saw the teams that needed quarterbacks last year. Carolina, Denver. Teams that he thought weren't all that. There was 3-4 teams. Mitch Trubisky said, you know what? I'd rather not sign on with one of these teams that has the same talent base, or maybe less than the Bear teams had, that I won with. He went 29-21, folks, as a Bear starter. Justin Fields went 2-8, and they're ready to build a Hall of Fame bus for him. See? So my point is, it wasn't about the winning. It was the Bears didn't take Mahomes, and they made him the scapegoat when it was Nagy and everybody else. So my whole point is that I think the Pittsburgh Steelers, I already bet on the over, 7.5 victories. That's a steal. Mitch Trubisky on the Bears won more games than that, and they don't have half the talent. So I think that's a steal at 7.5. I put that in with my guy already.
You know what's interesting is that Matt Nagy was such a bad coach. We have no idea. But what we did see was Mitch Trubisky go against our number one defense in preseason. And do not tell me our number one defense was not freaking motivated that day to not get embarrassed. And he absolutely torched us. Torched us up and down the field. That made me think.
Can I give you a compliment?
Please.
I've never met you before. Never been on with you before. We talked on Twitter. You want to come on? I tell BB, I got a good feeling about this guy. He's a get up and go guy, man. I don't even know who the guy is. I said, well, this odds breaker. I love the gambling business. I love everything else. You just made my day. You're the only guy that has brought that up. I was at Bourbon Street on 115th Street for an ESPN party, 1000, draft party, fantasy football party. All the guys were there, Carmen DeFalco, Sylvie, Tommy Watt, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was by myself as the only Trubisky backer. That game was on. The hush over the crowd, and it was packed, when Trubisky dissected the Chicago Bears team and embarrassed Nagy, and everybody poo-pooed it. It's only a preseason game. Are you kidding me? He came ready to play, and I do believe many Bear players were upset that he was gone, and I think some Bear players sort of didn't have a problem with him riddling with the Bears coaching staff. I didn't see the same intensity from that Bear defense to a man that they love. They got rid of a guy they love, and they bring in every quarterback, second stringer under the sun. And you brought that up. Great call.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that win total you just gave up too.
Yeah.
On the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look at that. And I got to tell you, but people ask me, what's your thoughts on the Bears' new coaching and Fields? I tell them I'm cautiously pessimistic. I am not cautiously optimistic. I am cautiously pessimistic because there's absolutely no reason that this regime, that I should have any faith that there's a better than 50% chance that this thing works out, Mike.
Do you think, if you look at 2018, that was Trubisky's second year after having to deal with John Fox the first year. If you look up the 2018 season and you read off Mitch Trubisky's stats, if Justin Fields has those stats, they'll feed him. They'll give him
he'll be a king.
They'll treat him like the king that they want him to be. He's not going to do that. Mitch Trubisky, all everybody ever says is, well, the double doink in 2000, the defense carried him. Look at Mitch Trubisky's 2018 year, folks. He had a 95 rating for the season. He threw 24 touchdowns, had 12 interceptions in his first year with a new coordinator. So it's all nuts.
It's absolutely insane. And me and you could sit here and rat on the Bears for the next 30 hours. I've been doing it for
30 years. I'm exhausted.
I'm exhausted too. And that's why we bet on sports, because we're Bears fans,
yes.
And that's why we love it. And let's get into this draft here. Let's start with what you kind of teased us with, Mike. Is there any positional totals that you kind of like here? I actually did my own mock draft like everybody else. What I like to do, Mike, is I like to say what teams need to do, and I say under that what I think they will do, because GMs don't do what they need to do in many cases. No. They're always mesmerized by those wide receivers and terrible picks like that. But either way, I have my own ideas. Let's see what you've made already.
All right. Let me get my drafting up here. NFL draft or prospects. I'm going to show people what everybody does as we go along.
Absolutely. And if the lines moved, let us know. I mean, obviously these lines have been out for a while, and some of them are stale. Some of them moved in my favor. I'll tell you a couple. But positional totals, where there's about 5 or 6 of them, they're not going to do edge rushers right away, because defensive ends and outside linebackers, that's a clashing thing. You don't know what the sports book's going to weigh that as. But I'm really interested to see where you found some value.
Well, I'm hearing people all of a sudden poo-poo Aiden Hutchinson as the number 1 pick. I'm hearing he might drop to 2, might drop to 3. If Joey Bosa or Aaron Donald or J.J. Watt or T.J. Watt or, B.B. Watt, whatever way you want to call these guys, if you think Aiden Hutchinson isn't a number 1 first pick in this draft, you're out of your mind. Michigan beat Ohio State. Not with a well-known quarterback, not led by and the offensive quarterback. This man was a guy in a big game and in a big season who ate the crap from Ohio State fans and led the charge. He's a leader. I think he should be the first pick in the draft. But I'm hearing people like a bunch of different people like Neal, Gardner. Stingley now has made a lot of noise from LSU. The receiver total right now is 5.5. I'm hearing everybody say there may be 6 or 7 because, you can't substitute for speed. So if they can run, forget about if they can catch, forget if they can run a precise pass pattern, forget about all that. If they can burn, coaches always think they can teach them the rest. And running precise pass patterns is something you have to learn when you're in Pee Wee football. You don't just pick it up. They make that mistake. That's why most of these guys fall off the shelf. They got a kid in Chicago, Darnell Mooney, who's not a bad receiver. He's learning to run patterns, but he's sort of smallish. If you have a guy like that, you don't want him running a lot of cross patterns because they won't last the season. You'd rather them be burners, get a guy like Allen Robinson that's put together that can be that slot receiver. So there's the mistake people make. But I do think 5.5 over for receivers. I think just because they play that glamour position, it's turned into a glamour position now.
It is. And I agree with you. I mean, those quick slants, you can get absolutely torched by the safety. There was a former Bear, I forgot his name, his back broken too when he got hit in one of those. I can't remember his name. It was maybe 8-9 years ago. Skinny guy, really fast. I his name escapes me, but he got absolutely destroyed running one of those crossing routes, and he just got, I think it was a quick slant or a crossing route, one of those. But yeah, Mooney's kind of small. He's got great deep hands and fantastic find, I think, out of Tulane that the Bears had. But we'll see. What's frustrating about the Bears, they draft a receiver every year, and Mooney's really the only one that turned out here. I mean,
well, the worst receiver, the worst draft pick of all time. I mean, I didn't like Curtis Conway, but at least Curtis Conway eventually became somewhat serviceable.
Yeah,
he did. He did. When he came to Chicago, he said, I don't like cold weather. I mean, my God, it's windy. And I go, we're going to have a problem. But I think this Kevin White's the absolute worst draft pick the Bears ever made. And they kept him around for 4 or 5 years.
Well, not only that, you should never, by the first year rebuild, you draft a receiver because they're more expensive year 3, 4 anyway.
Who wasn't that experienced?
Yeah. Even if he turned out.
He wasn't experienced. And then they keep him around for 4 years. He can't play after 1 year, but you don't want to admit your mistakes. There's where these teams, some of them, get out of here. You're not going to make it after 1 year. They don't care if it's a first round pick. Your winners will do that, but they don't make that many mistakes. So
you go over, and I agree with that. I agree with you, Mike. I'm going to comment on that. I have 7 receivers going. I disagree with the whole idea of doing that just because I don't think receivers move the needle nearly as much as trenches. But, that's how GMs do. And I do have 7 of them. And it looks like that 5.5 has moved up here. At DraftKings here, it's at 6.5. So
which should concern you.
Yeah, absolutely. It means that there's probably going to be 7. 6.5 is such a close number right now. I bet you that moves up even more when the public gets a hold of that line a little bit more before the draft.
There's another bet I like. I like the over 1.5 safeties. 1.5 safeties being picked.
I like that too.
Yeah, I think that defense is still so huge. Everybody concentrates on the offensive side of the ball until the playoffs start. I think if I had to pick between a defensive back that I needed or a wide receiver that I needed, and they were both like, I'd probably go defense first. I think you could find receivers are a dime a dozen. I think you can slip down to the 3rd, 4th, or 5th pick to find a receiver to play defense in the National Football League. If you got a guy that you think could be a 2nd round pick, maybe 32nd or 33rd or 35th, and you're picking 29th and you need a corner, take him. Because it's harder to, I think, draft for defense than it is to draft for offense.
I agree. And I actually have a play that kind of corresponds with that. I like Lewis Cine under 35.5 at minus 115. It actually looks like it moved in my favor up to minus 145. I still like it at that price. Let's face it, Hamilton from Notre Dame looked great in college, but they're going to hammer him a little bit for running a 4.640. You know, they're going to beat him up a little bit for that. Well, Lewis,
even though he's a safety and it's a different position, even though he's a safety, he's a pretty big kid. What is he? He's about 6'4".
Yeah, he's 6'3" or 6'4", I believe, and I can even pull that up. But he's a great prospect. But there's a chance that they're going to look at Georgia, and why wouldn't you look at Georgia? Because Georgia had the best defense last year in college football, and that tends to kind of push some people in the draft. You know, looking at Scene, he's also a big guy. I think he's about 6'3" himself, and he ran a pretty fast 40-yard dash. I have to pull it up, but I believe it was in the low 4.4s, I believe. And I think that they're going to like him under the 34.5 because you know what? Buffalo needs secondary. The Eagles need secondary. There's just so many teams, Mike, that need secondary. So I took Scene under, and I think that number keeps going down. Yeah, he's listed at 6'2", 200 pounds. I like it.
Okay, now I'm going to give everybody an example of what 90% of us do, okay? That do this, you know, it's talk show host business, and I've done it for years. But everybody, there's going to be somebody in the draft that you don't know. But for instance, if you hand me a guy's name, who's going to go 16th? Right before the commercial's over, I'll read up real quick. Charles Cross. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's an offensive lineman from Mississippi State. Let's see. Long arms, great top end, does a nice job, abandons technique, his weakness, challenges inside with counters. And, okay, you ready? I don't know who's taking 16. We'll pretend that the Atlanta Falcons are taking 16. Mike, who do you like? Well, I'll tell you what, I've been following this guy, Charles Cross, from the Atlanta Falcons for the whole season. And there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, he's got some rough edges, but offensive lineman, pretty big kid, loves the weight room. I've talked to some people that tell me that he's watched his diet more. He's a guy that can protect the flank and stuff like that. I've never even heard of the guy. All I have to do is read this and then just go. And I heard Peter King say something. I want to get your take on this. And Peter King, the difference between me and Peter King is simple. Peter King would be invited to eat at the McCaskey's house, okay? Because he's one of those mainstream media swamp guys. You know what I mean? Been with the NFL forever. He knows all the ownership. He loves the McCaskey. I'd be like Eddie Murphy and Coming to America. I'd be invited to the McDowell's house, but I'd be parking the cars at the McCaskey's, okay? But Peter King said something. I want to get your take on this. And I know that a lot of the shows I watch, even like VS Visson with Paulie Howard and Mitch Moss, they always quote Peter King. Well, Peter King's not always right. But I was reading something that he said. I want to get your take on this. Somebody told me over the weekend that so-and-so might be a good fit for the Steelers. I think it was Pickett or somebody, or he says, somebody told me. Could have been the guy that works at the diner. Could have been the guy at the convenience store. Somebody told me. Isn't it time we get names from people? Isn't it time you say somebody from the Steeler organization told me? Or somebody from the Philadelphia Eagles. It's somebody told me. That's what we go on nowadays, folks. And you forget about it once he writes it. But these guys are forced to come up with crap. Nobody knows, for the most part, what's going to happen here. But it's got to get better. I don't care if you're Peter King, who's in his 75th year. Somebody told me. You got to be better than that. You got to have more juice. I mean, I'm hearing after Mitch Trubisky was picked up that somebody told somebody that Pickett's going to be the pick. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I'll be shocked if they take a quarterback this year. That's a wasted draft pick. But if they take him, fine. But Mitch Trubisky isn't a bridge quarterback. See? So when I hear that, I'm going, would Pittsburgh really waste a pick after they just picked up a quarterback for 2 years? But because of reputation being so bad, they think he's a bridge quarterback when people don't realize Mason Rudolph was the bridge quarterback, but people heard that and they all got fed up in Pittsburgh, and the GM backed off and they went out and got somebody. Not saying he might not be a bridge quarterback, but it just seems to me, look at these teams, folks, and look at their acquisitions in the offseason and see if picking a quarterback when you just picked up one would make sense. Maybe it would. But don't forget, the Packers had Aaron Rodgers in his prime, and they went out and wasted a draft pick on Jordan Love. So I think people better be a little bit cautious.
Yeah. And so, and if you're asking my take on that, absolutely. Yeah. At least give us something here, because it's so easy. They get forced into come up with stories. They're bugged, they're paid for this, so it's very easy to say the tragedy with Dwayne Haskins, the fact that everybody hates Mitch Trubisky because of the Chicago media.
Right.
And, it just makes sense. He's from Pittsburgh. I think they're going to take Pickett. Well, that's possible, but I wrote down they should be drafting a defensive tackle. Okay.
Boom.
And
lineman, boom.
And if they're stupid enough to take Pickett, God bless them. I actually say I don't trust a lot of these guys. I think Mel Kiper was wrong on a ton of stuff last year and the last couple years. McShay, all those guys. If Mitch is the man, Steelers will be able to sniff that out, and they might be shocking everybody at pick 20. They might even trade out of it, Mike.
You might be absolutely right about that. Like I said, the draft is a learning experience for a lot of the casual football fans because something's happened where, I don't know, the players just aren't what they were. I can't figure it out. I don't know what happened, but the play has been subpar. And I think because of the wide open offenses that they have now compared to back then, and I'm not against that. Believe me, I lived through the Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes years, folks. Mm-hmm. Really, I was Brooks watching those games. I was Brooks in Shawshank. Give me the rope. Find me a beam. It was so boring. Those games were boring, but you knew every player in the draft by the end of the season, period.
Right. You sure did. And one play that I did make, and I made this play because it correlates with another position. If you're looking at safeties, there's one that really stuck out in the combine, and that was Jelani Woods. But do the books believe that in the first round? Absolutely not. Under 0.5 players for safeties is minus 700. But then I looked at running backs, and I don't see a running back in the top 5 that really sticks out. And that number was minus 190. I'm like, what's the difference here? Who's going to be reaching for a running back right now? With all the mistakes that are made at that position, the only team that could really use a chance on one's baby Buffalo, but they need a defensive back even more. I took under 0.5 for running backs. Breece Hall, Walker, the 2 guys from Georgia, they all look the same to me, Mike, and none of them graded like Jonathan Taylor or anything.
That's a good hidden gem that you just came up with. Not a lot of people talking about the 0.5 running back thing. And I'm big on those over and unders this year. I did the same thing with baseball this year. Instead of betting individual games, I picked 4 teams for season totals. So you have a game every night. Right. Here you have a player. What you're sweating it out. You're going to have to sweat out that whole first round. You're going to be like, with the 29th pick in the first round, the so-and-so take running. Oh, no, not running back, because then you'd go down. I'm with you. I can't think of a running back right now that sticks out in my mind. Tony Dorsett ain't walking through that door. O.J. Simpson ain't walking through. Those guys are gone. The wishbone's gone. A lot of things are gone. I don't see it. I'm with you on that one.
All right, good stuff, man. So I'm going to throw this one out there too. And this is a non-binary play. And I don't love to make a bunch of non-binary plays because there's multiple outcomes here. But when I look at New England's situation here, right? They got their quarterback. They paid up the ringer for 2 tight ends last year. You look at their free agency, Dante Hightower, Kyle Van Noy, and Jamie Collins, all 3 linebackers are not signed. What could the Patriots do to give them some leverage after this draft? draft a linebacker at spot 21 or 22 or whatever it is, because I'll tell you, Mike, linebackers are not coming off the board, and you're going to get a guy like Lloyd or the Dean from Georgia. One of the top 2 linebackers are going to fall to you. And not only will you fill the biggest position of need that you have, you are also going to give you leverage re-signing Kyle Van Noy. You're going to give a little leverage like that. And people say they need receivers. Well, they blew that with N'Keal Harry a couple years ago. They are not going to look like that again, Mike. Plus 300 that the Patriots draft a linebacker first. You get 3-1, my man. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are I wouldn't take that bet with another team, but that's a good bet with that team. See, Bill Belichick is a linebacker guy. He coached Lawrence Taylor in New York. So if I was going to say, is there a linebacker out there good enough to be a first-round pick? Maybe. But is there a coach that could make him into a first-round pick? And that's where that comes in. Now the trap is thinking that's going to happen, even though you're right, they are not signed yet. But New England usually gets people signed, and they don't play that leverage game. They just cut you if you suck. The fact that they're still out there, I mean, he said, I remember Belichick, a guy gained 200 yards one week on the ground. I forget what his name was. He was late for practice the next week. He never played again. You never heard of him. So I think that's a great bet but the only trap is what I just said. Oh yeah, Belichick will take him because he can work his magic but as far as New England, you're right. They're not going to take any chances, leave themselves short, but I think they'll sign their guys eventually or sign somebody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not all 3 of them, but at least, like you said, former coach. You can talk about the bargaining chip if you want, but he's also not looking at the combine. He's not saying, "Oh, I don't care that this guy ran 4.65." He hates it. He sees
he hates the combine. I can tell.
He sees a couple words. He sees Alabama. He drafts a lot of Alabama guys. His buddies with Saban. He drafts a lot of Georgia guys. There's a couple of those guys that are sitting there for him for the taking right there. So
I'm glad you brought that up, Nick Saban. I'll tell you why. I wanted the Bears to keep Mitch, but if they weren't going to keep Mitch, I wanted Mac Jones. The reason I wanted Mac Jones is I kept seeing that New England wanted Mac Jones in a lot of Mac drafts. And I said to myself, if I'm the Chicago Bears, do I move up for Justin Fields or do I take Mac Jones? Now, I don't know if Mac Jones would ever survive with the Chicago Bears, just like I don't know if Terry Bradshaw, when we flipped the coin, and would have ever been in the Hall of Fame had the Bears picked him. My guess is no. They don't have a good organization. But when I saw that Mac Jones was going on mock drafts and everybody was ignoring him except Belichick, I said, would Saban put his friendship on the line by telling Belichick to take him? Here's what I think happened. I think Saban said the kid's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever had, bright as hell. He's got a little baby fat around him. But so did Tom Brady. He's good on intermediate passes. Would he tell Bill Belichick to take that pick? And if it didn't work, I don't think it would risk their friendship. But I found that interesting, and I then would have thought maybe I'll beat him to the punch, and that didn't happen. So the same thing may go for these linebackers. Is there another team in front of New England that needs a linebacker that you saw? You got to ask yourself that question.
I think there's one, and that's a great question. But what I will say on that is, I mean, obviously you look at Belichick, you have to respect that. If it's in the mock draft, if you're getting some stuff from the Patriots, you have to respect that. I myself saw that nobody had a problem when everyone thought the Niners were going to take Mac Jones. Everyone's like, okay, that's cool. And then if it turned out to be a smokescreen and they grabbed the trade, but you have to remember that nobody said that's a bad pick at number 3. and he falls
Right.
to 15. The Bears
Yeah.
reached up for an
Right.
Ohio
Good
State
point.
quarterback, right? An Ohio State quarterback that never turns out in the NFL, slow delivery. And that's the big, concern with the Bears. And me and you can go on for hours, like I said,
But
about that.
You know what's funny about that? I'm not blaming Justin Fields alone. The team's bad, but Mitch knew how to work around it. The thing that bothers me is I said the same thing you said. Look, I don't live on trends. I don't live and die on trends, especially college ones. Oh, they've beaten Penn State's beaten them 5 times in a row. Well, those once in 1972. Who cares? Trends don't matter on that. But the amount of Ohio State quarterbacks that hasn't ever made it is disturbing enough for me to have wanted to steer away from Justin Fields. I don't care if you're talking about Braxton Miller. I don't care if you're talking about Dwayne Haskins. I don't care if you're talking about Art Schlichter. I don't care if you're talking about back in 1969 and 70 with Rex Kern, who was a hell of a quarterback. They made him a safety in Baltimore. So every damn quarterback that's come out of Ohio State, quite frankly, folks, has been a bum. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out why, because Darnell Mooney, for instance, wouldn't have even made Ohio State's team as a wide receiver. He went to Texas A&M. Every Ohio State quarterback throws to receivers who are top shelf, 10 feet open. Then they get to the pros, and the defensive backs are wearing those receivers like cheap suits. And they don't know how to thread the needle. They hold on to the ball because they're not used to seeing receivers covered. And I think the same thing goes, Kiev, with USC quarterbacks. Carson Palmer, okay. Poor guy got hurt. He looked good. I like Carson Palmer. But Sanchez, Pat Hayden. We can go back in time
Matt
with
Leinart.
the USC. Oh, Matt Leinart, Barkley. Why do I have to explain when people take an Ohio State quarterback or the USC quarterbacks? Why do I take Keith for having to explain why it's not going to work when they never work? Yeah. Sam Darnold, I said, went to USC. Well, so what? That's a running back school. Always has been.
Not just that, Mike, the whole point about having all the time in the world because you're behind 5-star offensive linemen, those crossing routes develop, and that's how they're wide open running before, these receivers are going to the top of the line guys. That is exactly it. And that's why Justin Fields got by with the slow delivery. That's not the quarterback that fits the NFL because everything is way faster. And if that ball's not out of your hand in 2 seconds, you better be somewhere Pat Mahomes is because you're going to.
Well, you know what? My whole deal, and it's just not. This isn't just picking on Justin Fields. My whole deal, though, is Justin Fields is a poor man's RG3 to me. Run, first thought. If you find somebody, he bought time. He was that talented in college because he had the right team, but he could also. Once the line broke down after 4 seconds, run around for 2 more seconds. So that's what you got to look at. What team is he coming from? That's why the Eli Manning thing to me was my favorite. I said, this kid's going to be great. They go, why? I go, when has Mississippi ever been good? And they all looked at me. I go, okay, when you have Terry Bradshaw had to be special. He was from Louisiana Tech. He wasn't from Ohio State. Wasn't from Michigan. I mean, to me, how you take an average team and make them a national champ. That's why I wanted Deshaun Watson for the Bears. They passed him up and didn't hardly even interview him. He made Clemson he was fantastic. Now, I don't know if he's ever going to play again. Who knows what's going to happen? But to me, it's the quarterbacks, and I said this earlier, that take the ordinary teams and make them super.
Right. Well, we don't know how long the suspension is. Yes, of course. Vince Young. Vince Young, one of the biggest.
He was the best ever. This guy's unbelievable.
We can go forever on some of these guys. Ryan Lee.
He was holding his shoe, crying on the sidelines, holding the spike in the sand, crying at the end. I mean, come on.
I know. Well, all great points. And I think some people are finally starting to figure out, unfortunately, for our Bears, I hope Fields works out. That's why I'm cautiously pessimistic. I'm thinking more to the no, but I've been wrong before. So let's just pray that the kid gets better, he fixes delivery, can check down a little bit like the
Who's going to be your first pick? Who's your first pick in this terrible draft?
Mine?
Is it Abe Hutchinson?
Neil from Bama. The offensive line would be my first pick from Bama. You just got Trevor Lawrence. The guy's 6'8", 350 pounds. He played guard for Alabama. That tells you that he can run block and he's a little bit fast on his feet. Neil is hands down the first pick in the draft. And when I say hands down, I just mean I don't like the rest of them, Mike. So I like Evan Neal from Alabama. He's my best player in this whole draft class, my man. And I want to give you a play that went against me that I think make no sense whatsoever. And I do think that maybe Jameson Williams is the best wide receiver in this draft. But if you look at him, he tore his ACL, which sucks. He's not playing till October, right? But then again, he's not 6'4" DK Metcalf. He's not AJ Brown metrics, right? He didn't have that. He left Ohio State for a reason. He went to Bama. He did really good. But the fact that a GM on the hot seat, which is usually a top 12 drafting GM, would grab a running back, a wide receiver with a torn ACL that can't even play the first half of the year blows my mind. I took under 12 and a half over 12 and a half. I took he's going to pick later than 12 and a half and it went down to 11 and a half. So it moved against me, Mike. But I still think it'd be really stupid in a receiver class that's really bunched up together to reach for a guy in your top 12 picks. It blows my mind.
Well, here, it's like going to a used car lot. No, forget about used car. Going to a new car lot. Looking at all the cars and go, they're nice, but where's the one with a dent? Is there one with a dent here that I could, look at? And the guy would look at you. Wait, this is a BMW dealership. Yeah. But you know what? If you have a dent, I can maybe work it out, and things will get better. That doesn't happen. Now, that doesn't mean this kid can't be terrific. I saw Willis McGahee break his leg in half in the Orange Bowl. Okay. I said he'll never play again. He played 16 years. Pretty good player, too. So I'm not saying work ethic comes into play here. Okay. All of a sudden, the guy that was indestructible has been destroyed. The mental part of the game comes in here. Okay. How much you want it? There's some guys that get hurt that never can come back. And then there's other guys that get hurt and keep coming back and coming back. So that's the one thing you got to look at. I'm with you. You can't, to me, if you got a bunch of other people that are healthy, you don't take a chance, in my opinion. There's not,
especially if he's 6'1", the size of the other receivers, Olave, right. And it makes no sense.
Yeah, you need to be a burner if you're that big. You need to be if you're that little, you need to be a burner. We already said he's already got injury problems, and he's not anything ordinary. I like that pick.
Awesome. Sounds good, Mike. Well, any other plays or thoughts about this NFL draft?
Well, I think where it's being held at, I think is a shame that it's not a better draft than we're used to. I'm just honest with what I do, but I'm glad it's being held in Vegas. The Bellagio ought to be hopping. They're going to have them taken out in boats. Hopefully there'll be no casualties, no drownings, everything else. And I just think it's going to be fun for the football maniacs, but I think it's going to be a draft. I don't even watch. I mean, the second day is okay. I watched maybe some of the first day. But there's going to be other stuff going on, too. So let's hope that the Bears don't even have a first pick. And the Raiders don't have a first pick, which is a shame being in Las Vegas. That would have hyped things up a little bit more.
I know. What is going on? Raiders, no first pick. Come on. What a bad year to do this. Jesus. Well, hey, I guess they can just show off Devontae Adams. They can just have him kind of walk across maybe. Or do a little catwalk for the fans over there because that's so true here, man. Well, great, exactly. Mike. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Great job as ever. Love talking Chicago with you, my man.
Thanks,
Where
buddy.
could our listeners follow you and get your great plays that you make weekly?
Well, you could follow me on first of all on Barroom, the Barroom Network. I do a podcast. I'll be probably doing one this week for the draft. I also am on ESPN 1000 with the great Carmen DeFalco, Randy Merkin, all the boys up by there, Fridays and Friday night. Although with White Sox baseball, we do have the podcast up, but then Saturday morning at 8 o'clock we have the show. So we'll have some stuff on the draft this week, and it's going to be a great fun. It's always interesting. The NFL is gold no matter what, and they're putting on a great show. And I really appreciate you having me on, buddy.
Awesome. Make sure you guys check out Mike North and follow him on Twitter at North to North.